All right. Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us in the world. Welcome to Crazy Talk. I am your host, Lee Thomas. If this is your first time tuning into Crazy Talk is a mental health video podcast thing where we talk about kind of all sorts of things related to mental health. And like I said, I'm your host, Lee Thomas. If this is not your first time tuning into Crazy Talk, thank you so much for coming back. I'm glad we haven't scared you off yet. And I'm super excited this week. We had little technical difficulties, but we've managed to get our guest on the show, which I'm super, super excited about. So our guest this week, I'm messing with the screen. There we go. Our guest this week is Asante Haughton. I'm so excited to have you on the show, Asante.
Oh, I'm super excited. Thank God we worked out the technical difficulties.
Yes.
Start to sweat a little bit.
Yeah, it was kind of last minute. Okay, I'm just going to introduce you to our audience. So, passionate about social justice and equality, Asante Haughton is a national award-winning mental health advocate dedicated to endeavors aimed at building stronger communities. He is an activist, poet, thinker, and speaker who believes in people, global interconnectivity, and positive personal change. Not only has Asante made several TV appearances and been featured in a documentary, Three Voices, he has spoken internationally, presenting in Canada, the US, Colombia, and most recently, Ireland. Asante has made noise as a 2-time TEDx speaker and was recognized by CAMH as one of the top 150 difference makers in mental health in Canada. When not trying to save the world, Asante can be found laughing at his own jokes, Netflixing, watching cartoons, and being frustrated with Toronto sports teams, which I'm sure lots of people can relate to.
Always.
Though Asante can be pretty laid back, he is loud about his advocacy and drive for change as he aims to deliver a message of social awareness, justice, community betterment, and above all, hope. Asante, I'm so glad to have you on the show.
That was the best intro I've ever had for anything.
I'm so glad. That's my personal goal now is I'll be your hype man. I'll just follow you around to all your speaking engagements and introduce you.
You are hired.
Oh, thank you. So Asante and I had the chance to meet at the Peer Support Conference in Calgary a couple weeks ago, which was super exciting.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and a lot of fun, and we flew by the seat of our pants, but we did do a great little workshop. So, Asante, do you want to kind of tell people a little bit? I did post your TEDx talk on my Facebook page, but do you want to just tell people a little bit about kind of why you do the work that you do? Because a lot of people kind of live with mental health issues and don't become advocates and speakers, but you did. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
I kind of became an advocate by accident. I graduated university and I had my undergrad in psych and no master's and PhD. So an undergrad in psych alone, we all know what the career prognostications for that are. So I just started volunteering a lot. And, I did have interest in mental health as, it was something that, my mental health challenges were, were in the very recent past at that time. And then, my mom was still recovering and my brother was just entering recovery for some of his stuff. And so I just started volunteering in mental health, and then I had the opportunity to talk and realized the impact I could make just by telling my own story. And then, just getting more and more involved over time. And, my motivation is, really helping young people in particular because just knowing what my experience as a young person was struggling mightily as a teenager and young adult, I just didn't want anyone else to feel the way that I felt, ever, because it was so just painful for me and difficult. That became my motivation. So, I started out telling my story, and then I started branching out into different things and doing more and more of sharing my thoughts and getting involved in different ways and doing frontline work and just doing a lot. So,
yeah, you've always got a lot on the go, which I love. Very involved in all sorts of different things. And so Asante is on Twitter, and I'm going to put a link to your Twitter profile in the comments at the end of this show.
I've been active lately.
Yeah, and I love what you have to say, because especially there was one that really resonated with me where it was, kind of as young mental health advocates, and probably as mental health advocates in general, but I can really only speak from the perspective of a young mental health advocate. But you mentioned there is this kind of, we want you on stage sharing your story, and then, we're going to get someone else with a degree to come on stage and say, what changes we need to make, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I guess how do you I have two questions out of this. So one
All
of them
right.
is kind of how do you manage I guess the maybe the frustration around that or the feeling that, sometimes you feel as though you're a bit of a show pony, they trot you out and you're like, this is my trauma, and then they're like, okay, now move on and the adults are gonna talk now. So I guess my first question is kind of how do you manage the frustration around that?
um, it's interesting because I don't think the frustration around that is something that I fully started to feel until recently. So I don't know if I've quite worked out my coping for that yet. But yeah, I guess, for several years I was just kind of happy to be here and, happy to be living half decently and, make a living for myself and and then it was kind of like, okay, but I'm happy to just be at baseline and feeling like I could have so much more to contribute. And yeah, that feeling of being a show pony, um, you know, I guess at first I was kind of just happy telling my story, but then I wanted to, do more and say more. And I felt like those opportunities never came up or people just talk to you weird. Like the people who organize these events, like people, I'm a grown ass man and like, and I'm responsible and mature and there's I have a lot of things going on in my life and people are always talking to me like I'm some like kid who's still like lost and needs their help a lot on top of things and it's like it's not that like what I do is a favor because it's I don't see it that way but I feel like a lot of times the organizers of these events feel like they're doing me a favor
Yeah.
just
Oh, we're
like
giving you a platform, right?
exactly
Yeah, and
and
sometimes I feel like in mental health when it's because it's something that people care about because they have a personal connection to it, there's this expectation sometimes, and I this is my experience and maybe it's yours as well, there's this expectation sometimes that like because you care about it you will do this work for free,
yes
right? Like because
yeah
we're giving you the opportunity to help people. So and it's like I got rent to pay.
yeah
Like
right
yeah, and I find that's really especially again like as like a youth, even though youth is like up to 30 now, so it's like where it is that kind of feeling of like I'm a grown ass adult. Like I have thoughts about this,
hmm
but that feeling of like we're giving you the opportunity to help people, and if you were really invested in the cause, you will take this opportunity and you will be grateful for it,
yeah
right?
yeah
Which
so
is frustrating.
super frustrating. And I think that's a part that gets like I feel a lot of times I get speaking to young people. I speak to teenagers. Probably 70% of my speaking is to teenagers, and I always feel like I get so much more of like a genuine respect as a human being from the young people than I do from the administrators and the people who organize these things. And I feel that just kind of throws me off a bit. Like, I'm really, really happy to be here for the kids, but you know, it would also be nice to feel valued by the institution. And I got a thank you card the other day that literally was just the words like "thank you" printed on the card. They're like not even a signature or anything.
You're like, okay. Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like sometimes, and I know there are a lot of schools out there with like administrators who are very passionate about this and all that kind of stuff, and I've been really happy to work at some of those
hmm
schools. But some of the schools that I go to, I definitely feel as though like sometimes it's administrators going like, we need to prove that we're doing something, so this is like a box that we're checking off, right? Like
Yeah,
we've checked, we've
exactly.
had the mental health speaker, what next?
We have
Without kind
used
of
that
making
funding.
yeah, without making those like systemic changes that are going to make those long-term differences to those students. Because like for me, I go into a school and I speak and I chat with the students afterwards, but then I leave,
Yeah,
right? Like I'm
yeah,
gone.
yeah.
And so it's kind of up to the staff and the administrators and other students to make those longer term changes.
It's interesting that you say that because, um, like I'm I've done some stuff like some schools have been really on point, doing the work the right way, like doing it for the virtue and the value of the work. And I've had the opportunity to do some extra work with schools who demonstrate that, and it's always been really amazing to have them kind of say, okay, we realize there are some gaps that we need to reach. And then, I end up doing a little bit of consulting with them and coming in and, seeing what's up with the students and, kind of working with them on a different level. And then, what's come out of that has been initiatives that are actually helping the kids move forward. I don't really I don't talk about that stuff that much, but, that's happened several times with several schools. And I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but something like that might be cooking up in another school that I did some work with recently. And, essentially, I think what they're trying to do is hire me to create ongoing mental health programming in their school. So, that's exciting.
That's
Have that
super
up.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening with that.
Yeah, when you're allowed to like give us more details, you should come back here and like post in the comments, and then we'll all like go back and sort through and be able to see it. Oh, that's
Definitely.
really exciting and really, really needed, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I guess I'm just like I'm just gonna throw some stuff at you and see what you think.
Okay.
Because in Ontario, you guys recently had an election.
We did.
So as someone who, you had some exciting stuff happen too. Like there was that recent announcement maybe a month or two ago about all of the kind of new money that was going into those youth hubs and that sort of thing.
Billions.
Yeah, which is exciting, but then we have kind of a government coming in that maybe mental health is not so much their priority.
Mhm.
So do you have any thoughts about that, or are you just kind of waiting to see where the chips land?
How honest am I allowed to be on this
You're allowed to be as
podcast?
honest as you want. It's totally up to you. This is like
um, yeah, I definitely do have some thoughts. I think I would say overall that I'm not catastrophizing as much as I think others are, in the sense that, um, you know, my belief is that the government that is coming in is not. I guess it doesn't appear that they're well organized enough at this moment to really be able to make the pendulum swing in either direction right now. Um, and I think it'll take them some time to kind of get sorted out in that regard. And as time passes, it might be 1 or 2 years into I guess this particular leadership before anything actually really starts to happen, which might in a way be a good thing, as it may prevent certain things from being blocked or repealed. Um, it's interesting. When Kathleen Wynne made the announcement about I think what $2.1 billion, I believe it was. Um, I was actually in the audience that day. I was actually on the stage behind her and stuff, so like in the background. But everyone was super excited, and having some, I guess, connections in the industry. I got a bit of a breakdown about how that money would be used, and I was, for the most part, I'm satisfied with what the plan was, and just hopefully um, the government coming in can see the value in making that sort of investment, because ultimately it's about saving lives for sure, but it's also about as we talk about infrastructure and as that relates to things like the economy and uh, government debt and all that stuff. I think we often forget that humans are a very important part of the infrastructure, and
yeah.
health is a very important part of humans. So, like, taking care of people's health improves the infrastructure, which will, then improves the economy and saves money in, various different ways. Us, in the industry, we talk about it all the time. Just, if people aren't, you know, putting a strain on the mental health system or the health system at large or the justice system or all these different systems that are affected by people struggling. A lot of money spent, helping people, intervening. And, I guess the idea with this $2.1 billion is spending more money preventing might actually save more money in the long run, but it's not typically how governments really think.
Yeah, it's not often like that kind of proactive approach, right? Because often, because governments are working on, 4 or 5 year cycles, so they
Exactly.
want to see those immediate results, right? As opposed to like, well, if we invest a lot of money in like youth mental health now, 10 years from now, there will be fewer young adults, in the mental health system or that sort of thing. But yeah,
Exactly, and then especially and I think about it also like this: is that A lot of mental health challenges, issues, things start when people are young. And so people are like really having their formative years affected. And what happens in your formative years? The most important years for your education: high school, university, grad school, etc. You don't get great marks in high school because of your mental health challenges. All of a sudden, you're not going to university. Or maybe your university grades get messed up. You're not going on to your master's, etc. And then someone's life is extremely affected by that. Um, so I think about saving lives, just not in the sense of like saving someone's physical like life and their consciousness in a body, but I think about it from the standpoint of giving people more opportunity to have a happy and fulfilled life.
Yeah, so both like, saving the lives of people in crisis, but also, helping people fulfill their potential and live, live the lives that they will find fulfilling. Absolutely.
Exactly.
Um, so this was, I guess, kind of tying in the past two questions. So, if you were to get on that stage and not only tell your story, but also kind of have that platform to go, these are the changes that I think are necessary to like the system. What sort of changes would you want to talk about?
It's interesting. I've been thinking a lot about um, what it really means to serve, what it really means to. Sorry, I have a screaming child in the
No
background.
worries.
uh, um, yeah, just I think one of the big things for me is our systems are antiquated,
Mhm.
and our systems, were designed at a time when it made sense to have it designed that way. And now so much has changed in terms of awareness, medical tech, technology in general. There have been so many changes in our society. Our society is much more connected and diverse in ways that it hasn't been before, and our system just hasn't adjusted. It's still, a lot of the way our system runs was something that was built in, the time of industrialization. And, it's been 200 plus years. Let's, maybe.
Let's shift something. Yeah.
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
So,
like maybe let's take
um,
another look at this. Yeah.
yes. Yeah. So, overall, just I think, I think a lot of systems and organizations are really concerned about mitigating risk,
Mm.
and that mitigating risk that has a small chance of ever coming to pass, and marginalizing people as a result, and disempowering people as a result, of protecting themselves from a risk that is highly likely to never happen. And even if it does, it's probably not going to happen often enough that it's going to tear everything down.
Yeah. Can you give me an
So,
example of that? I know I have an example that's kind of in my head right now, but like, can you give me kind of a concrete example of, that like an organization, and the mitigating risk sort of portion of it? You don't have to
um,
name an organization, but like, we're not pointing fingers here.
oh, it's interesting because I normally have examples like right at the top of my head, but I can't think of one right now. So
Yeah.
maybe you want to
Kind of.
share yours, yeah.
Yeah, because the one that I thought of, so I was a proctor, which is what UNB calls an RA.
Uh huh.
So I lived in residence with like all of these students, and we saw a lot of risk management stuff come in, even in the 4 years that I was there, because it was kind of those 4 years where like it went from not as many people talking about mental health to like everyone talking about mental health. Like that shift kind of happened
Hmm.
for me, at least when I was in university.
Definitely,
Like
yeah.
a bunch of
Same.
committees coming in, and like all of a sudden it's like a hot topic, which
Yeah.
doesn't mean it's not important, but like it was just a hot topic.
Hmm.
Um, and there was kind of this whole thing about like if someone is having thoughts of suicide, how do we make sure that we are not to blame,
Hmm.
right? As
Hmm.
opposed to going like, how do we help this
Yeah.
person? There's kind of this feeling, or like how do we reduce the risk to this
Hmm.
person or anything like that? It's like, how do we make sure that whatever happens to the
Hmm.
student is not our fault, which I think
Yeah.
is just like, I guess institutions think they have to work that way,
Hmm.
but it's not a very, I think, compassionate approach. And it's not, UNB is not alone in that approach, right? Like a
Hmm.
lot of institutions take that whole kind of, if we don't know about it, if we're not to blame for it, then that's our number one priority, and everything else comes second to that.
Yeah, I think that's an incredible example because, as someone who does a lot of speaking in high schools, I'm always told explicitly not to mention the word suicide,
Ooh.
and which I sometimes have problems with, because how are we going to raise awareness about something we are afraid to name and talk about?
Yeah.
Uh, so in order to deal with the thing, we have to talk about the thing. But I'm constantly being told, no, you can't say the word suicide. You have to find a
Wow.
different way to describe it. Yeah. And then, and it's really to, it's that whole like fear of suicide contagion type thing. And here's the thing is, I'm not going to go out there and say precisely what I was thinking, what I had planned, and maybe how I had attempted to do it. I'm not going to do that, because
Yeah.
now that is not necessarily safe. But I should be able to say that, I had contemplated, or or and
Yeah.
and I think that we need to make that a safe conversation rather than a scary one, because again, if we make it a scary conversation, we're protecting people from being liable if something were to happen. uh, but if we have a safe conversation around suicide, or just at least open the conversation up instead, now what we're doing is maybe allowing someone who is struggling to be able to, um, you know, speak about it and get some help,
Yeah, and just
which is
that
what you
that
want, right? So,
yeah, and that power of being able to put words to your experiences, right? Because when it feels like there's this like it's kind of because I grew up in small town northern Alberta where like no one
uh-huh.
talked about mental health,
Oh
and it
boy.
does kind of feel like you're like trapped under like a layer of ice, right? Like you're like in the water trapped under ice, and it's like if someone just says a word, then it's like a breaking through that ice a little bit.
Yeah.
But like when I do my speaking engagements, I always talk about with my eating disorder. I didn't know the words
Yeah.
for like my eating disorder, and so
Hmm.
that made me feel really scared because it was like what you are doing is so bad that there are literally no words for it. Like it's
Yeah. Yeah.
indescribable, right? And so having like and having words for it didn't suddenly cure my mental illness or anything like
Hmm.
that, but it made it more tangible. You know what I mean? It made it kind
Hmm.
of not this undescribable ethereal sort of
Hmm.
terror, right? Like
Yeah.
it made it real and practical and something that you could actually have a conversation about.
Yeah, and I think the word there is, it made it practical.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing happened to me. When I started to like have labels for the shit that I was feeling. I'm allowed to swear.
Yeah,
So it was like all of a sudden I was able to depersonalize it, and
yeah,
so it wasn't that I was defective. There was like a thing that I was experiencing that I can work on, and maybe learn to live with in a way that is, just a lot better than the way I was living in the past. So, oh man, I feel like I was going in a direction, but I forgot. um,
but that feeling of labels sometimes having that usefulness, right? People tend to
mhm,
feel really strongly about labels, and some people are like, no, labels are always bad, and it's like labels can be super useful for people,
mhm,
right? Because then it is this whole like because I wouldn't go to the doctor and say like I'm a really bad person, please fix that, like i'm
mhm,
i'm terrible, but I
mhm,
might go to the doctor and say I'm having symptoms of I read online and I'm having symptoms of what I think might be depression or whatever it might
mhm.
be, as opposed to like going in and being like I hate myself, fix that, right? Because that
Yeah.
that to me would not have seemed medical,
Uh huh.
right?
Uh
Like and so that was a big turning point for me, was like learning that like it was an illness and all that kind of stuff, and I think the illness kind of framing has its weaknesses as well.
huh.
But even the idea of like this is something you can talk to someone about as
Uh huh.
opposed to just being like I'm here to confess that I am a bad person,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, with the labels, I think sometimes it gives people relief, and it gives
Mm-hmm.
people hope. That was my experience, definitely, and and so I think that what's interesting is that when I facilitate my own stuff, where I'm not necessarily being restricted in terms of my language,
Mm-hmm.
I share quite openly about my own experience, and some of the things I've been through, and it's interesting that when I do that, I create more connection than when I'm standoffish and it's only kind of giving people bits and pieces, but not actually what like really happened or what my experience really was. And so I think you know being open can actually be a tool to help people connect the dots with themselves sometimes. And it's just like what you said. Sometimes you don't know what's going on until someone else kind of paints the picture for you, and all of a sudden your story kind of fits onto their canvas. Um,
Yeah,
So
and that
yeah.
feeling of I'm not alone in what I've experienced, right? And
Hmm.
that in and of itself can be huge, right? Just hearing like, you are not the only one. And I mean there's a big difference between going like you're not alone, lots of people deal with this, like
Uh-huh.
so suck it up, versus like, you're not alone. There are other people who've experienced this. And like one of the things I often say in my presentations is I'm like, there's nothing special about me. Like I'm not a
Uh-huh.
celebrity and I'm not an Olympian and I'm not even Twitter famous. But like, so if I went through a really hard time, me as like an ordinary human being, if
Hmm.
I went through a really hard time and came out the other side of it, like if I can do that, you can do that too, right? And
Yeah.
that whole feeling of, of hope, really. And I
Yeah.
think that not to boil it down to one simple thing, but hope is so important, right?
Super important. Super important. Without hope, it's like hope is almost like I'm not saying that it has to be present, but when hope is present, I think it makes it easier to engage in the things that you need to do to start moving forward in a positive way. Going back to the labels thing, what I was just thinking is that in our life, there are so many ways that we use labels as a form of empowerment. Our identities. We often label our identities, and then our identities become something. Where we're able to generate a sense of pride and belongingness and community. So why is it that when it comes to mental health, we're scared of the labels? And it's funny because I got friends who um, are quite happy to not be seen as neurotypical, to not be neurotypical. Uh, I don't mind it either. All of my friends, whether they're in the mental health community or not, they know what I'm about. They know my story. They know who I am, and and me being able to like share those like labels, uh, I think in a lot of ways people respect it.
Mm-hmm. And again, that community piece and that human connection piece, which is like, it sounds so simple, but it's so important, right?
Hmm.
That feeling of belonging to something, which I think is yeah, it just, the importance of that can't really be overstated.
Definitely, for sure. So,
Yeah. So I can't believe we are out of time, which is wild.
oh
It's been
my
so, I know it
goodness.
flies by, right? So it was so great talking with you. So the folks who are watching this show right now,
Hmm.
if they are like, Asante is amazing, I want to hear
Yeah.
more. What would you like folks to do kind of next if they either want to get in touch with you or if they want to, learn more about some of the stuff that you're doing?
Oh, you probably want to hit me up on Twitter. So, my Twitter handle is Asante V. So ASANTE and then capital V. You could follow me on Instagram at nerdy.black.guy. And and Lee's laughing. And yeah, just I'm all over the internet. Google me, throw my name in YouTube, watch my TEDx talk, which has a really long title, which I probably shouldn't have done because I can't remember my own title for my TEDx talks now. Yeah, so again, just throw my full name, Asante Haughton. Is it on the? It's on the website, right? So do I need to
Yeah,
spell it
and
out?
it's
So
on like we
yeah,
we put a link to it on
okay,
on my Facebook page, which I'm
super dope.
pointing in the direction of wherever that would be on the
Facebook
Facebook page.
page is
But we'll also
on the
put some
wall.
links down in the comments below for anyone
Okay.
who's watching the replay of this or that sort of
Hmm.
thing, so they can also check those out. So yeah, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been really really great having you.
Oh, it's
For
been a
anyone
pleasure.
who's thank you. For anyone who's watching the show, if you're thinking like, wow, Crazy Talk is awesome, I would love to get episodes of Crazy Talk directly to my inbox, you can do that by signing up for my mailing list. You can sign up by going to leethomas.ca, or you can click on the link that is going to be below in the comments about 5 minutes after the end of the show. So thank you everyone so
Can I
much
say
for
one more
tuning
thing?
in.
Can I say one
Oh
more
yeah, oh
thing?
my god, absolutely,
I just
yes.
want to say, Lee, thank you. And y'all better subscribe because Lee is awesome and super dope. And Lee is doing big things and it's going to do even bigger things. So
Oh, well, thank
thank
you
you.
so much. Oh, what a great note to end on. Okay, thank you everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Peace.